All right, so let's dive into some of the cool things happening in Flutter. We're going to go a
Yeah.
little deeper today
Yeah, let's do
and
it.
see what's new, not just for the developers who build the apps you use every day, but also for you, the end user.
Absolutely. And you know what's really cool is that behind the scenes of every app that you use, there's this constant stream of updates, fixes, improvements, kind of like a busy workshop where things are always being tweaked and made better.
It's like magic behind the curtain.
Exactly.
And today, we're going to use some actual real-world examples from Flutter's public issue tracker, which is on GitHub, to pull back that curtain and really peek into the developer's world.
Yeah, and it's a world, that can be full of mysteries and challenges,
Oh, yeah.
but ultimately it's aimed at making your app experience better.
For sure, for sure. So let's get into mystery number one.
Okay.
Imagine you're on your iPhone, you're using a Flutter app, and suddenly crash.
Oh.
You get this kind of scary-looking error message that says, XCBait access exception.
That's never good.
It's not, right?
Mm-hmm.
But luckily, a developer actually wrote a really detailed report about this crash.
Okay.
So we get to kind of play detective and go through it.
All right. I love a good mystery.
Me too, me too. So the report actually mentions something called attempted to dereference null pointer, which I'm sure a lot of people hearing there are like, what?
Sounds very technical.
It does sound technical, but we can break it down. So imagine like you're reaching for a doorknob, but there's no door there. Like your hand just goes right through empty space.
Right.
That's kind of what a null pointer is. The app is trying to access something that just isn't there, that doesn't exist, and that causes it to crash.
That makes sense.
And the report actually helped pinpoint exactly where this missing door was in the code,
Okay.
a part of Flutter's code called impeller.canvas.
So Impeller is Flutter's new rendering engine, and basically what that means is it's how Flutter draws everything you see on the screen, so a powerful tool. But as with all powerful tools, sometimes there can be some glitches.
Yeah, so it's like the app's paintbrush just disappeared.
In a way, yeah. And the fix was basically to teach the app how to check for that door before trying to open it so it doesn't crash.
I like it.
Yeah.
So this fix was included in Flutter version 3.2 9.2.
Okay.
So if you've updated your apps recently, you've actually already benefited from this behind-the-scenes work.
Nice.
Less crashes, smoother experience. I love when a mystery gets solved.
Me too, me too. But it sounds like we have another one on our hands.
Always. So this next one involves scrolling, animations,
Uh-oh.
and you guessed it, another crash.
Those are never fun.
So imagine you're scrolling through a long list in an app, and at the same time, there's like this cool animation happening, like maybe a loading indicator or some kind of transition.
Yeah, just something to keep me entertained while I'm waiting.
Exactly. But then, bam, crash.
Oh, no.
And this time, the culprit was something called a race condition.
Ooh, race conditions. So those are interesting. It's kind of like when two people are trying to squeeze through a narrow doorway at the same time.
Perfect analogy.
Chaos. Chaos is bound to happen.
Yeah, so in this case, the animation and the scrolling were both trying to update the same part of the screen at the same time, leading to a conflict and ultimately a crash.
That makes sense.
But the good news is a recent Flutter update actually fixed this race condition. So now you can scroll and enjoy those animations without your app crashing.
That's great. It's amazing how much work goes into making those everyday things we take for granted, like scrolling, work so seamlessly.
Totally. And speaking of things that should just work,
Okay.
let's talk about text.
All right.
So we mentioned Impeller earlier, which is Flutter's new rendering engine. But as with any new technology, there are going to be some hiccups.
Yeah, it's like learning to ride a bike.
Yeah,
You might wobble a bit at first, but you eventually get there.
exactly. So there was this issue found in an app called Wondrous. It's a really beautiful app, by the way, if you haven't checked it out,
Okay.
where sometimes the text wouldn't render correctly.
Oh, the text. That's pretty important.
Yeah, it's kind of important for most apps. But the error message itself was a little cryptic. It said, could not find glyph position in the atlas.
Okay, I think we need to break this down a bit
I think so, too.
because I'm a little lost.
So glyphs, basically, are the individual characters that make up the text that we see. So each letter, each number, each symbol, that's a glyph.
Got it.
And the atlas is like a giant map where Flutter stores all of these glyphs for quick access.
Oh, okay.
So when the app needs to display some text on the screen,
Yeah.
it looks up each character on this map, grabs the correct glyph, and boom, text appears on the screen.
So it's like a lookup table.
Yeah, like a giant library
Yeah.
of all the different characters that you might need.
I like it.
And in this case, something was preventing Flutter from finding the right glyphs on the map,
Oh,
leading to those text rendering errors in
yeah.
Wondrous.
So, like, it's trying to find a book in the library, and it's just not in the right spot.
Exactly. But the good news is the Flutter team were like expert map makers, and they were able to quickly identify the problem and implement some fixes to make sure that Flutter could always find the right glyph no matter what.
Nice.
So the next time you're admiring a really beautiful font in a Flutter app, you can appreciate all the work that went in to making sure that those letters appear flawlessly on the screen.
Absolutely. The little things matter.
They do. They really do.
It's like the unsung heroes of
Yes.
app development.
Totally. All right. Let's switch gears for a second and talk about something specific to Android devices.
Okay.
Did you know that Flutter is always working to optimize performance
Yeah,
for different types of phones and processors and all sorts of different hardware?
absolutely. Making sure it runs smoothly on all sorts of devices.
Exactly. So on some Android devices with processors made by MediaTek,
Okay.
there's actually an option to use something called OpenGL instead of Vulkan for graphics rendering.
So those are, for people who don't know, those are different ways of handling graphics, kind of like different paintbrushes for different canvases.
Yeah, Vulkan is generally newer and more efficient,
Yeah.
but sometimes using OpenGL can be a better choice, especially for specific devices.
Right. So it's about picking the right tool for the job,
Exactly.
even if it's not always the newest, shiniest tool.
Yeah, and this highlights Flutter's commitment to really adapting to all the nuances of different hardware
Yeah.
to make sure that your app runs smoothly no matter what.
That's pretty cool.
It's pretty cool.
So are we ready to go even deeper?
I think so. I think our listeners are ready to get into the weeds with us.
All right, let's do it.
So this next change is, so behind the scenes, it might make your head spin a little bit, but it's all about making Flutter web apps even smoother.
Ooh, I'm intrigued.
So it involves something called a pull request, which is basically a proposal to change the code.
Okay.
And this particular pull request focuses on CanvasKit, which is Flutter's web rendering engine.
Got it. So if Impeller is like the paintbrush for Flutter apps in general, CanvasKit is the specialized one for painting on the web.
You got it.
Okay, I'm with you.
And this update, this change, is all about making that painting process faster, especially when it comes to creating images from what's already on the screen.
Okay, so give me an example of when this would come in handy.
So imagine you're using a Flutter web app that lets you take screenshots or create images from a live video feed. This update would make that whole capturing process super speedy and efficient.
So it's smoother, faster, less lag.
Exactly.
Got it.
And the really technical term for this is transfer to image bitmap.
Okay.
But basically, you can think of it as instead of redrawing the image pixel by pixel, it's just making a direct copy, which is way faster.
So it's like copy and paste for images.
Yes, exactly.
That's really cool. So why doesn't Flutter just always do this? Why not always use the super fast copying method?
That's a great question, and it has to do with browser compatibility.
Ah.
So not every web browser supports transfer to image bitmap.
So it's like Flutter is trying to speak in a way that all web browsers can understand.
Yes, and it might mean that sometimes it has to use a slightly slower method if that specific browser doesn't understand the faster one.
It's like having a translator trying to make sure everybody's on the same page.
Exactly. But it really highlights how much thought goes into making sure that your Flutter web app runs smoothly no matter which browser you're using.
Yeah, well, that's impressive.
It's very impressive.
It's all about that seamless experience.
Totally, totally.
That's amazing. And so, it's incredible to think how much work is going on behind the scenes to make all these things that we kind of just take for granted. Scrolling, text, all these things just work.
Absolutely. And that's why these deep dives are so much fun.
Yeah.
Because we get to really appreciate all of the craft and complexity
Yeah.
that goes into making the tech that we use every day.
Totally. And it's like this iceberg, right? Where you only see the tip above the water, but there's so much going on underneath the surface
That's a great analogy.
to make it all work.
It is. That's cool.
It is really cool.
Yeah, it really is like peeking behind the curtain of a perfectly choreographed performance. You start to notice all the little details that make the show run smoothly.
Exactly. And just when you think you've seen it all, there's always another layer to explore.
Always something new.
Always. So this next Flutter mystery takes us back to the world of scrolling,
Okay.
but with a twist.
Ooh, scrolling, a developer's best friend, and worst nightmare all in one.
I can imagine.
So what kind of a twist are we talking about?
So picture this. You're using a Flutter app. You're happily scrolling through a list, and then suddenly, crash.
Oh, no, not again.
But here's the thing. The crash only happened if you were scrolling while a very specific type of animation was also running.
So it sounds like a very particular set of circumstances had to happen for this crash to occur, almost like a digital domino effect.
I like that. That's a good way to put it. And as it turns out, this domino effect was triggered by, you guessed it, another one of those pesky race conditions. Oh, those race conditions, always causing trouble. I'm starting to think they're the mischievous little gremlins of the software world.
I love that analogy. So in this case, the race condition happened because the scrolling action and the animation were both trying to update the same part of the app's interface at the exact same time.
Okay, so that's leading to a conflict, kind of like when two people are trying to write on the same whiteboard at the same time.
Exactly.
It's bound to get messy.
It is, but luckily, a Flutter developer named Victor Sani came to the rescue with a very clever fix.
Our coding superhero swooping in to save the day.
Exactly, so Victor's fix essentially acted as a traffic controller, making sure that the scrolling and the animation took turns updating the interface, instead of both barging in at the same time.
I like it. Very elegant solution.
It is. So no more crashes, and for you, the end user, that means you can scroll through those lists, you can enjoy those animations without worrying about your app suddenly deciding to quit on you.
It's all about those seamless experiences.
Exactly. Seamless and stress-free.
Okay, so speaking of things that should just work,
Yeah.
let's get back to those Impeller errors that we touched on earlier.
Yeah.
So Impeller being, Flutter's new rendering engine, it's still under development.
It is. It's still a work in progress.
Yeah, it's like learning to ride a bike. You might wobble a bit at first, but you eventually find your balance.
Exactly. And hopefully you avoid any major crashes along the way.
Right, exactly. So what kind of Impeller wobbles were we dealing with this time?
So this particular issue was causing some apps to actually encounter errors when they first opened. And the error message was pretty cryptic. Break on impeller validation break to inspect point of failure, could not find glyph position in the atlas.
Oh, the mystery of the missing glyphs.
Yes.
All right, so it sounds like our map analogy from earlier might come in handy here again.
It does. So remember, glyphs are those individual characters that make up the text.
Right, each letter, number, symbol.
And the atlas is like this giant map where Flutter stores all of those glyphs. So this error message is basically saying that when the app was starting up,
Yeah.
Flutter couldn't find those glyphs on the map.
So it's like trying to find a restaurant on a map, but the restaurant isn't marked correctly.
Exactly. And it wasn't just affecting one app, it was actually affecting multiple apps, including a really cool app called Wondrous, which is kind of like a showcase app designed to demonstrate all the cool things that Flutter can do.
Wondrous. Okay, I might have to check that one out. So it's affecting like a flagship app, this Impeller error.
Yeah, it's not ideal.
That's like having a scratch on your brand new car.
Yeah, not a good look.
So how did they solve this? Did they like redraw the map?
Sort of. So it turned out that the problem stemmed from, and you probably already guessed it, another race condition.
Those race conditions.
They're everywhere. But this time the race condition was happening during the app's startup process.
Okay.
Specifically when Flutter was trying to load and access those glyphs in the atlas.
I see. So it's like everyone's rushing to get to their seats before the show starts.
Yes, and there's a bit of chaos.
A little bit of a scramble.
A little bit of a scramble, but luckily, a Flutter developer named Guy Clark managed to outsmart those sneaky race conditions.
Okay, good for them.
And they made a series of changes to how Flutter handled glyph positions and the atlas itself, ensuring that the correct glyphs were always accessible even during those, really chaotic startup moments.
So thanks to Guy Clark, Flutter apps can now start up smoothly and display text without any hiccups.
Exactly.
That's great.
It's a good reminder that app development is a constantly evolving process, always working to refine things and make things better.
Always improving.
Always improving. Speaking of improvements,
Yeah.
let's shift gears again and talk about a tweak specifically for Android devices.
Okay.
Did you know that Flutter can actually adapt its graphics rendering based on the type of Android device you're using?
Now that you mention it, I do remember something in our notes about OpenGL and Vulkan.
Yes, so on some Android devices, particularly those with MediaTek processors, there's an option to use OpenGL instead of Vulkan for graphics rendering.
Right, and we talked about this earlier. Those are different ways of handling graphics, like different paintbrushes for different types of canvases.
Exactly.
So Vulkan is generally newer and more efficient, but sometimes using OpenGL can actually be a more reliable choice, especially on certain hardware.
Yeah, so it's about choosing the best tool for the job, making sure that those Flutter apps run smoothly on as many different types of Android devices as possible.
Precisely. It's like having a wardrobe full of different outfits, and each outfit's perfect for a specific occasion.
Ooh, I like that.
So Flutter can just, adapt its attire to fit the device perfectly.
I love that analogy, and it really highlights how Flutter is committed to providing that consistently great user experience, no matter what kind of Android device you're rocking.
It's all about that seamless cross-platform magic.
It really is. Speaking of magic,
Ooh, tell me more.
are you ready for our final deep dive?
Oh, yes, bring it on.
We're going to explore a behind-the-scenes performance boost that's all about making Flutter web apps even smoother and even more delightful to use. Okay, deep divers, we are in the final stretch of our Flutter exploration today, so get ready for one last peek behind the curtain at how Flutter web apps are getting even smoother.
Awesome, I'm excited.
I am too. We've seen how Flutter developers are constantly working hard, solving mysteries, and optimizing performance for both developers and end users.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey.
It has. We've tackled crashes, race conditions, missing glyphs, you name it. But now, we're going to zoom in on a specific performance boost that's all about making Flutter on the web even more delightful to use.
Ooh, I'm ready to be delighted. Where do we begin?
This one starts with something called a pull request. Basically, it's like a suggestion box for improving Flutter's code.
Okay.
And this particular suggestion was all about making Flutter's web rendering engine even faster.
Ah, the rendering engine. So that's the part of Flutter that's responsible for drawing everything we see on the screen when we're using a Flutter web app, right?
Exactly, you got it. And this pull request was specifically focused on speeding up how Flutter creates images from what's already visible on the web page.
Interesting. Can you give me an example of when this might come in handy?
Sure. Imagine you're using a Flutter web app that lets you take screenshots or grab still images from like a live video feed.
Okay.
This update would make that whole process much faster and smoother.
Got it. So less waiting around for things to process.
Less waiting, more seamless experience.
Much better.
And the secret sauce behind this speed boost is a technique called, and get ready for it, transfer to image bitmap.
Oh, wow. That's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful, but you can think of it like this. Instead of redrawing the image pixel by pixel, it's basically like having a magic photocopier that can instantly duplicate an image without having to recreate it from scratch.
That sounds incredibly efficient. So why doesn't Flutter just always use this magic photocopier?
Yeah. That's a great question. There is a slight catch, and it all comes down to those web browsers. They're kind of like different languages, and not all of them understand transfer to image bitmap yet.
So it's like Flutter is trying to speak in a way that all web browsers can understand, even if sometimes it has to use a slightly slower method.
You got it. It's a balancing act. But it shows how much effort the Flutter team puts into making sure your web apps work smoothly, no matter what browser you prefer to use.
I love that about Flutter. There's so much happening behind the scenes to make our online experiences better. It's all about that attention to detail.
Couldn't have said it better myself, so hopefully today's deep dive has given you a new appreciation for all the constant work that goes into making Flutter apps reliable, smooth, and enjoyable to use.
It has been a fascinating journey. We've uncovered mysteries, learned about race conditions and glyphs, and even explored how Flutter adapts to different devices.
And the best part is, this is just a snapshot of what's happening in the world of Flutter.
It's constantly evolving.
Constantly evolving, with developers all over the world collaborating to make it even better.
That's pretty cool. If you're ever curious about the tech behind your favorite apps, remember there's a whole world of fascinating details just waiting to be explored.
A whole world waiting to be discovered. And with that, we've reached the end of our deep dive into Flutter.
It's been a blast.
It has. Thanks for joining us on this adventure, everyone.
Until next time, keep exploring and keep wondering.